Uh, okay. And we usually we've been doing these webinars every week about the war. We want to talk about what happened in more. I want to talk more this time about what happened in Washington. And we of course have a different mix of speakers. As usual, we have General Yaakov Amidror, JINSA's distinguished fellow, former National Security Advisor, Prime Minister Netanyahu. We have also our senior fellow, John Hanna. Um, and we also have this time, as we're fortunate to have some other times, Ambassador Elliott Abrams. He's a senior fellow with the Council of Foreign Relations. He's also the chairman of the Vandenberg Coalition and chairman of TICFA. And he's a former senior U.S. official, having been Deputy National Security Advisor for Mideast in the Bush administration. I'll just do your last two, Elliot. And also Special Envoy to Iran, on Iran and Venezuela under President Trump. And a grandfather yet again as of yesterday. So congratulations, Elliot. So we'll start with Elliot, and we'll go with this time, General. We'll start with the Americans, and because we were speaking this morning, the action here was in Washington this week. Obviously, normally there are a few subjects I want to discuss about what happened this week, but obviously the biggest news, the most shocking news was, of course, President Trump's announcement at one of the most engaging press conferences I think we've seen in the White House, where he talked about relocating Palestinians in Gaza temporarily or longer term, rebuilding Gaza. He talked about the United States owning, I think he used that term, owning Gaza, and rebuilding it. And he really put the onus, I think, on others. I'll just say one more thing, Elliot, before I have you speak. I think we've seen, Senator Rubio and National Security Advisor Michael Waltz kind of say, okay, well, if people don't like what the president is suggesting, put forward your own solutions. So, how do you explain what we've seen this week on the Gaza front from the White House this
week? 8 years ago, somebody said something about the Trump campaign that I think was very smart, which was, too many people take him literally, but they don't take him seriously. You should take him very seriously, but not literally. And I would say that about the Gaza plan. That is, it seems to be one page. It isn't a plan in the sense that there are 100 pages of details of how many Gazans are going to go where, when, how. It's an idea. And it's an idea that reflects a few important things. One of them is there is no alternative plan to reject. It's not as if Israel, the United States, the Europeans, the Arab League, Egypt has come up with plans and we can try to find the best. There is no plan. Second, Trump did not advance this by way of denouncing or condemning or demonizing Gazans. Actually, what he said about Gazans was very nice. They deserve to have a decent life. No one can have a decent life in Gaza. It's not possible because of the extent of the damage. Interestingly, he blamed no one. He didn't blame Gazans and he didn't blame Israel, unlike former Secretary of State Blinken saying too many people are dying, there's too much bombing. He didn't do any of that. He said Gaza's hopeless. It needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. So what about the people there? What's going to happen to them? Now, I do not believe that this plan will go forward. And you can see White House officials and administration officials beginning to pull back a little bit. No, we're not paying for it. No, we're not putting American soldiers on the ground. So what's the point? Why do it? Why say it? I think he wanted to shake things up. I think he wanted to say, somebody's got to come up with a plan. I think he wanted to demonstrate the futility of the old formula of the two-state solution, which is a formula that he sort of supported last time. It was in the great 100-page peace plan, though he never really pushed it. He's certainly not pushing it at all now. By saying what he said, he draws attention, as I said, to the fact that there is no workable plan. He also draws attention to the fact that no one is paying attention to the Gazans. Germany took 1 million Syrians, 1 million Syrian refugees. Egypt, EU, Jordan, nobody is taking 10. People are just making speeches about how terrible Israel is and how much destruction there was, and they're not coming up with anything to do now in Gaza. So I think will Trump be depressed and cry in his beer? Well, he doesn't drink. In his milk? If the plan doesn't go through, no. But I think he is quite consciously saying, particularly to the Arab world, you have a responsibility here. There are 2 million people living in what is now a miserable, even more miserable place. Don't make speeches about the two-state solution. Help them. I think that's very Trump-like. That is, in a sense, throw a verbal bomb in the middle and then see what happens.
Let me ask you one thing. I want to follow up, and then we'll come back on this. But it's just stepping back for a second. And you said it's Trump-like. He throws a bomb in the middle, but it's rather interesting, if not impressive, that someone like him, who's not known as a policy wonk, says something like this that really exposes a lot of the hypocrisies in the region and in the discussion, and says, okay, everything that's been suggested before doesn't really make a lot of sense. I mean, how do you explain that? I guess
I think there's, he likes iconoclasm. He likes saying to the powers that be, he likes saying to the, people who've been involved in this diplomacy for decades, you don't know anything. You're not doing anything useful. And I think I explain it by his extreme pragmatism and transactionalism. That is, he looks at this situation and says, but people have been talking about the two-state solution for decades. That's not happening. There's 2 million people here. How come no one is giving them any real help? Stop the speeches. You want to help? Help. I got a way to help. Let's rebuild the place. Got to move people out with very sort of super pragmatic and transactional. And for that, you don't need the deep background. In a way, the deep background tells you what is possible and what is not possible and what not to say. He doesn't have it. So he says whatever he thinks.
John, let me ask you, and then we'll go to General Amidror. But I mean, Elliott just mentioned there is no other alternative plan. And if I'll just remind the audience, because we had a policy project, JINSA did with the Vandenberg coalition, with you chaired, and we worked with Elliott and a few others of a day after in Gaza. We put it out almost a year ago. I think it was the end of February last year. And we put forward something, and I think actually the Israelis are now experimenting with one of the recommendations about using private security companies in Gaza. But that plan, and you wrote a terrific update of it, John, where we were, I think, a couple months ago. And I'm just curious how you see this, given how immersed you were and Elliott was on this issue, that there was no plan on the table otherwise. And now Trump just threw in a new one that no one was thinking about at all.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, it's trite to say, but nobody had this on their bingo card, right? Yeah. Getting ready, moving 2 million Palestinians somewhere, much less the U.S. actually taking it over, taking an ownership interest in Gaza and doing something with it. We certainly didn't think of that. In fact, we said from the beginning, we think U.S. troops being involved in any way, shape, or form on the ground in Gaza should be a non-starter. It's not in America's national interest. But I agree with a lot of what Elliott has said. On sort of how he comes up with this, I don't think you can divorce it from the fact of what his entire professional career has been up until the point he became president. He was a real estate developer. And it's not an accident. His son-in-law said a year ago, you got to move these Gazans out. This is really impressive real estate. You could do tremendous things with it if, he didn't say if you had decent governance there, but obviously you got decent governance, somebody comes in and cleans it up. So I think that's an important fact here. There is an issue. How much three-dimensional chess is he playing? How much of a negotiating tactic is this? Is he really, as Elliott says, not, take him seriously, but not literally? He's not being literal. He doesn't intend for the United States to actually take over and redevelop and to move out 2 million Palestinians. But instead, he's calling out which you can't help but take a degree of pleasure in, the cynicism and absolute hypocrisy of the Arab states that for decades have taken no real responsibility for this problem of the Palestinians, and on the contrary, have used it as a cynical instrument and tool, mostly to redirect the anger of their own populations away from complaining about their domestic governments and directing their anger at Israel and the United States for failing to actually resolve this problem. And he's, calling them out. You guys now actually have to take real responsibility. You don't like this. What are you going to do to help destroy and end Hamas and have a new government that's better than Hamas, that's better than a corrupt, illegitimate Palestinian authority? How much money and troops and whatever are you going to commit to trying to build something better in Palestine and have an authority there that first and foremost is prepared to live in peace alongside a Jewish state, not to have as its primary project the destruction of the Jewish state? And, I think, that's entirely legitimate, as is the basic humanitarian question that he puts his finger directly on. What in the world are we going to do with 2 million people living on top of this wasteland where there is absolutely nothing left except rubble and unexploded ordnance and dead bodies and, tunnels that are ready to collapse in many places? It's completely unsafe. What are we going to do with these 2 million people once this war is over? And that's entirely legitimate. The one real bank shot that is being talked about, and I think even some Israeli officials are backgrounding it, that there is a Saudi play here, that in fact what the president really has in mind is recreating the situation he created through his peace plan back in January 2020, where he raised the prospect that as part of that deal, Israel would be able to annex its settlements, as well as some other pieces of Judea and Samaria. And what he got was not peace with the Palestinians, but he got the Emiratis rushing in to try and delay and defer any kind of annexation, and taking the opportunity to do what they wanted to do anyway, which was make peace with Israel and say they're the ones who salvaged and saved the two-state solution. And now in 2025, what Trump has done is create this prospect of what the Palestinians, and a lot of Arabs at least, will say is potentially a second Nakba for the Palestinians being dispossessed from their land. And MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, can kind of rush in, defeat this idea of the second Nakba, help the Palestinians, and say he's saved the day and give him an excuse to do what he obviously wants to do, which is have a normal relationship with Israel. I personally think that's a bit far-fetched to believe that's what's going on here. That is a degree of three-dimensional chess that I'm not sure I credit the president with. I think he's a little more direct than that in the way he's negotiating this, but you never know, and we'll see. You can hope that that's the case. We haven't discussed some of the potential downsides of this, but we can get to those potential problems with this as well.
So, okay. And so now, General Amidror, let me ask you, I want to talk about the Arabs in a second, but okay, we started with the Americans. Since this action took place in Washington, tell me what's your thinking about this, and how do you think Israelis are looking at this as well? Bibi and
Look, Israel from the beginning declared that one of the most important aims of this war is to degrade Hamas to the level in which they don't have the military capacity to attack Israel. And I think that was achieved. And the second one, that the organization will not control Gaza, and to make all the efforts to lead to the release of the hostages. We didn't reach the second aim. The second aim is still waiting for us. If the Americans, by taking out Hamas as part of any agreement with the Arab states, or by this relocation of the Palestinians, or to whatever, Israel will be more than happy. It will save us another war in Gaza with all the problems and the life that should be sacrificed for them. So from the Israeli point of view, it doesn't matter how. What matters is that at the end of the process, Hamas will not control Gaza. And here there are two choices here. One is that the agreement between the two sides, the Americans and the Israelis, will say, okay, this is our aim. Let's say the Americans try to do it their way. And it should be agreed that if the Americans don't succeed to do it, the Israelis will have the ability to do it their way, meaning a war. And this is, I think, is very important because it keeps Israel ability to fulfill the mission at the end when we are giving chance, first of all, in priority to releasing the hostages, and then to the Americans, if they believe that can be reached without a war, fantastic. If not, it should be understood that Israel has the right, because that was agreed between the Americans. And so for the Israelis, the details, if it be that way or another way, it's less important. What's important is the end game. The end game should be Hamas is not controlling the Gaza Strip.
Yeah. That's the implication, certainly, of what President Trump is suggesting. Someone, by the way, I think it was a board member, sent me something, I guess, that circulated map of the area. It says two-state solution, Israel, and over Gaza it says United States.
United States of America.
Yeah, okay.
He's hesitating. People say that he's hesitating between Canada and Gaza, and he decided Gaza is better.
I see. Let me ask you.
If I can just add, Mike,
Please,
one of
Elliott.
the other
Yeah.
things that sort of interesting, when Trump talks about Gaza, he talks about moving Gazans out, he talks about Israel. He doesn't talk really about the Palestinian Authority.
Yeah.
That's just not in the conversation.
Yesterday I was interviewed by El Arabia, and he asked me the same question that you asked. What about the Palestinian right? Said, guys, you are speaking about that 80 years, and at the end, look at the refugees. We had refugees from all Arab countries, more refugees than Palestinians. The ex-chief of staff in Israel was the son of such a refugee. What happened to your refugees? They're still refugees. Why? It is easier for you to keep the Palestinian problem. They will suffer for the next 20 years because we will not rebuild Gaza if Hamas is controlling it. So for the next 20 years, they will have miserable life only to service your need to have a reason to complain about Israel. I mean, if you look at it from the humanitarian point of view, his solution is much better than all the other alternatives which hadn't been put on the table yet.
You know, some people brought up, you know, with UNRWA having such a prominent role in Gaza and the emphasis on the Palestinians in Gaza being refugees, all of a sudden the suggestion is no, actually Gaza's their home. It's a little confusing, I find, how some of these countries are answering. Now, I want to start with you, General Amidror, and then we'll go back to Elliott. We've talked about this on webinars before, and that is Egypt. I can understand why the King of Jordan, who is coming to Washington next week, would not want to have 10 Palestinians, as Elliott suggested, come to Jordan. But with Egypt, it's one of the surprises in the last, since October 7th, is how the United States has allowed the Egyptians not to take any Palestinians, not to be allowed to set up any sanctuary in Sinai that would help save lives of Palestinians while Israel was killing Hamas. And now this kind of puts maybe the onus a bit more on them, perhaps, or maybe not, and they'll deflect it. I'm just curious. It's kind of also a twist because when Biden came into office, I thought he'd be harder on Sisi. And I thought when Trump was coming in, he'd be a little easier. And now it seems like it's almost been the reverse.
I was not surprised when we learned that the Egyptians are not ready to accept even one Palestinian. On the contrary, when here people spoke about it at the beginning of the war, that maybe the best solution is to have an open pass for the Palestinians to Egypt. I said the Egyptians will not allow it, and there are three different reasons for it. One, the Palestinians have a very bad reputation in Egypt. They despise the Palestinians. Why? History. Palestinians betrayed them here, and all the time are blaming the Egyptians and so on and so forth. They despise the Palestinians. But I believe that more than that, remember that Hamas is an extension of the Muslim Brotherhood. The last thing the Sisi needs, he needs another, I don't know, 40, 50,000 people which have a kind of commitment to Hamas, which is another kind of Muslim Brotherhood. And the last but not least, look, to do it, the meaning of it, deep in the symbols of the Arab countries. And it's very important symbol, and this society very much appreciate symbols more than our Western society. It's another Nakba. And Egypt is cooperating with those who are doing the second Nakba of the Palestinians. Yeah. It will be very bad for the Egyptian reputation and Assisi personally, in spite of the fact that practically it will be much better for the Palestinians. It will save them from living in those horrible this horrible situation inside Gaza, which was bad from the beginning, and now it's almost impossible. Look, there are Palestinians that move from the Muasi north to Gaza city, and they walked back to the Muasi because they said the situation in the Muasi, in the tense area, is much better than what we can have in the north part of Gaza. So for humanitarian point of view of the Palestinians, not Israel, it is much better what was offered by Trump than what they have other offers relating to the Palestinians, at least in the next 20 years, maybe afterwards. So here is a kind of contradiction between the symbol and the practical life.
Hey, Elliott, I'd like you to address that. I know Egypt has always been one of your areas of interest over the years, and also maybe it's worth just mentioning. My recollection is vague on this, but in the first Gulf War, didn't the Saudis kick out Palestinians from them? I mean, there have been even in recent history, where other countries have.
No, the
Well-
Palestinians cooperated with Saddam Hussein.
Kuwaitis did,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yes,
Yeah,
and this is why the Gulf countries don't like the Palestinians. They said they betrayed us when there was a real test,
Right.
and many Palestinians worked in Saudi Arabia, in the Gulf countries.
Right.
They've been expelled by those countries because they cooperated with the Palestinian PLO authorities went with Saddam Hussein.
Yeah, I mean, one other thing that's striking here, I'm just think of all the wars of the last century. Second World War, Korean War, Vietnam War, Israel's wars. There is no war where people were not allowed to flee. There is no case, Ukraine today, where people were told, no, stay there.
Yeah.
Stay there and suffer. You're not allowed to leave. It's absolutely unique. The general, of course, is right that Palestinians went to the Gulf. They didn't go as refugees so much as they went to work. And Kuwait, for example, had hundreds of thousands of Palestinians not living in refugee camps. Never. All over the Gulf, they were working. You'd go into a hotel. Who was the accountant? Who was the desk clerk? Palestinians. And that ended with the Iraq War, when Arafat chose to support Saddam Hussein. Immediately after the war, they were expelled from most of the Gulf countries.
Yeah. Okay. Look, we'll see how this, unless someone has another comment on this Gaza thing, I'd like to turn about Iran.
Mike, can I just
please,
say, that while there may be a lot of upsides to what Trump said, and we kind of all get some degree of pleasure out of him speaking the truth, as a creature of the swamp, as a career staff person for principals, including presidents, to see it written in the major papers that the president of the United States could drop this kind of hand grenade into the middle of this region that is as fraught and difficult as it is, without having had any kind of discussion or debate with his top national security advisors, much less with the intelligence community or with any kind of staff work being done to kind of red sell it and figure out what might, the reactions be, what issues, risks does it create if we were to do this, gives me, I start to break out in hives a little bit. I just got to say that. The other thing that I would say, Mike, and this worries me, because
it's like the Oslo Agreement in Israel.
Yeah, I would say the degree, okay, yes, Gaza has been a problem. Israel has smashed them militarily, as General Amidror says. Right now, for many years, potentially, if the IDF does its job better than it did before October 6th, Hamas will pose no serious threat to Israel. There's been business that needs to be finished when Israel goes back in and destroys Hamas eventually. But in terms of American priorities, the things that we should be thinking about right now that are really important to our vital national interests, it is not figuring out, who's going to rule in Gaza City next month or next year. It is peace between Israel, Saudi Arabia, the rest of the moderate or pragmatic Arab Gulf and Muslim countries, and Iran. Figuring out how do we organize this coalition to defeat Iran, to pile on to what the successes Israel has already had, and to neutralize the Iranian nuclear program. That's what we ought to be focused on. Anything, in my mind, that distracts from that set of American priorities, that creates differences or problems for our Arab partners, forces them to be on the defensive and responding to us and putting out statements about what they can or can't do regarding normalization at this point, I think is I would have argued internally this is, not where we want to be spending the next several weeks sucking all the oxygen out of the room rather than working on the set of problems that I'm sure you're going to now turn to.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
If I may, one remark about it. I not fully agree. I think that there is important for the whole Middle East, and in a way indirectly for the United States of America, to show that an organization like Hamas cannot survive after the atrocities of the 7th of October. It's not about Israel, by the way. It's about the Middle East, to show all those who are Middle East who are still do not understand where should the Middle East will go, to show that those who are following ideas like Hamas will not exist. It is not just about who will control Gaza at the end. It's not a minor question. It's about the destination of the Middle East when there is an idea like Hamas kind of competing with other ideas. It should be clear that those ideas like Hamas cannot survive. And it is not, it is about the whole Middle East, and in a way, it's not that just the Middle East. Think about the kind of what you see, kind of what demonstrations you see in the West. Israel should show to the West and to the Arabs and the Muslims in the Middle East and outside the Middle East, those way of attitude, this attitude of like Hamas minded, cannot survive. And it is very important. It's not a minor issue.
I'm not saying it's minor. I would simply say, I think the lesson most of the region has already taken from this war is don't start a war with Israel, because the devastation, not just in Gaza, but in Lebanon with Hezbollah, what you did to Iran, and that the first job is to finish the Iranians. It'll have its own positive impact on Hamas, but then we'll go back and we'll finish Hamas. But to the extent it doesn't pose an immediate threat to Israel, get the hostages out, turn to the big strategic issues, and Hamas's unfinished business that needs to be done. But we can argue about that. But Mike, I know you want to move on.
No, I do. Thanks, John.
No. I think that if we speak about prioritizing it, you are right. We have to go after Iran, and it should not be too late, and it should be done now. But we have to remember that we didn't finish the job with Hamas, and to finish the job is important for the whole Middle East. It's not a minor issue.
So let me answer, and I'll turn to Elliott first on this. I think maybe I should have said at the beginning of the hour, but it seems to me there were three main issues here that we were looking at for going on this week. For me, the Iran issue was the most important, and I think echoing what John just said, it didn't get as much play. I think obviously the Gaza thing has overshadowed everything. And I want to ask the other thing is normalization between Israel and the Saudis. And then there's Gaza and this war. Those are the three main things I thought. I want to ask Elliott, start with Elliott, because it seems like on the Iran issue, there's been less spoken about. We all get a sense, we've written at JINSA, John and I have had a couple of op-eds recently saying, okay, the time to hit the Iran nuclear facilities is now. Yet you had, I mean, now meaning, in coming months sometime, before the, given where the Iran nuclear program is and the expiration of snapback in the fall, that before that, it seems like that has to be it. Yet President Trump did a social true social post, I think is the terminology, where he says it's been greatly exaggerated, this discussion that the United States and Israel will destroy Iran or destroy Iran's nuclear facilities. He also made clear in another post that he wants to pursue negotiations with the Iranians, which, well, John and I just had a couple pieces like this recently saying that would be an Iranian trap. Clearly, Netanyahu seems like has not dissuaded this week Trump from pursuing that. That's what it seems like based on the public statements. But I'm just curious how you read this week on the Iran front, what might have gone on in the meetings and whatnot?
My impression, pardon me, my impression is that Trump is continuing his policy of the first term. We remember maximum pressure of 2019 and 20. What was the purpose? It was not regime change.
Yeah.
The purpose was to force them into a negotiation that would produce a deal that was very different from the JCPOA, which he thinks is a terrible deal. It would be different in that it would not be time limited. It would include not only nuclear weapons, but missiles and proxies, regional issues. This past week, he has said that. He has said Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. That's out. And we will act if we need to, but that would be unfortunate. We want to solve this problem by negotiations. In other declarations and in executive orders, he has reimposed maximum pressure. The Treasury Department has started its work. The scope of a deal is now clear. That is, it needs to be broad, not just nuclear. So the old policy is back. I think maybe this is a disappointment to Netanyahu, maybe it isn't, but the trap of the negotiation, of course, is that Trump is then saying to Netanyahu, don't bomb while I'm talking.
Well,
don't bomb while negotiations are underway. I would rather do this through negotiations. So down the road, there's got to be some kind of agreement or understanding on when can we say there are no serious negotiations. The Iranians are just trying to play out the time. We do know that snapback has to come really by the end of the summer. I think it's October that the Russians chair the Security Council. You want to do it before then.
No, it's October. It's October.
So you've got, 6-7 months. I think as those months begin to go by, there have to be discussions between Trump and Netanyahu on how long are we going to wait to see this negotiation drag on and drag on? Because I'm sure the Iranians will say, if you impose snapback, the negotiations are over. And we will leave the nuclear non-proliferation treaty and we will, it's a bluff, in my opinion. But this is the kind of discussion that has to take place over the next 6 months. I only wish that during this period, when Trump wants to negotiate, there is also military planning, and there are exercises and there are displays that remind the world, including the United States, that at the end of the road, there may be a military attack.
But I want to turn to General, but 1 second on this. I think that one of the things I'll also add is, and we don't know fully what's come out, but it seems like Trump has been unblocking the arms weapons that Biden started blocking.
Yes.
And we've written about this, that a lot of the focus was on the 2,000-pound bombs, but my colleague Blaze and I wrote some in the Wall Street Journal a few months ago. It actually wasn't just 2,000-pound bombs; it was actually also 1,000-pound bombs and JDAMs and so on. And there
the armored bulldozers.
Yeah, the D9 tractors. Yeah, right, the bulldozers. That's right. So, and Trump, my understanding was it indicated to the Israelis a couple of months ago that he was going to do this, and it seems like he's been doing that. And that is obviously important to the Israelis, and perhaps even beyond that, those weapons. But let me ask you, General, how you assess about the Iran issue, which I think we all agree is ultimately the most important strategic issue for Israel here. And do you agree with what Elliott said, that you think that will Israel feel constrained to act during talks, if there are talks going on?
It reminds me my first visit with my counterpart in Washington after I was nominated to be the national security advisor. And I told him that it's not about the negotiations. It's about we are more than happy to have an agreement with the Iranians. If America has an agreement with the Iranians, we will be more than happy if that will be a good agreement. And I defined what is a good agreement. The policy of America then was dismantling the facilities. Then it was changed by the administration and the president to postpone and monitor. But at the beginning, when we said we were more than happy to have an agreement. So it very much depends what agreement will be agreed. If the America has a good agreement, which not just postpone for a few years the Iranian project, but stop it for eternity, it's a good agreement, and we will be more than happy to have it. We are not happy trigger guys that are looking for wars around us. We have enough, as you know, in the last year and a half. So if that can be achieved, fantastic. If the Americans need for that few months for negotiation, good enough. We will continue to prepare our kinetic capabilities because we don't know what will be at the end of the negotiations. If the Americans come out after the 4 months and say, guys, it doesn't work. They are playing for time. We are not ready to take part in this game. Do whatever is needed. We have to be well prepared. And for that, we need American help. The most important one is the oil tanker, but we need some kind of munition.
KC-46 air refueling tankers.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
We are in the queue for, I think, 28 or something.
This will be 27, I think.
Yes,
Right.
and if that will be done earlier, it's a decision. It's not that America cannot. It's only a question of decision of the administration. If that will be done, and we will get it, it means that we will be ready and very happy if these capabilities of Israel will not be needed because the agreement will be a very good one. But if the agreement will not be achieved, we want to be in a position that we can do what is needed to be done. And then it doesn't matter that America will negotiate with the Iranians. We will have to spend the money to be better prepared when it will be clear what is the situation.
John, I want to turn to you, and if you want to add something about this, but also about Iran, but also talk about normalization. And what do you think is the ideal sequence here? There are, as I mentioned, I think the three big topics that I could identify as how to handle Gaza, the Iran nuclear, and normalization with the Saudis. And, they're connected, actually, or one would think they are. The Saudis going to do a deal while the Gaza issue isn't resolved yet, or if Israel needs to go back in. We don't know how the ceasefire deal is going to play out. Is there going to be a phase 2 and so on? Anyway, I want you to address also that issue if you want to add anything on Iran, and also talk about normalization. Where does that fit in with the other two matters?
Yeah, couple of things on the Iran issue is, as Elliott said, on the day that the president met with the prime minister this week, he did issue his executive order reinstituting his maximum pressure policy, and very good that they've begun to, even today, the Treasury Department issued sanctions specifically going after networks that were involved in oil deliveries to China, which has been the big major problem of the last several years, is all that oil being sold to China, and it sounds like they're getting after it. My concern about the EEO was that it's what Elliott said has been missing, is it issued orders to a whole bunch of cabinet secretaries. Yes, it was focused on sanctions, but it was focused on the broader problem of how do we stop this Iranian threat in all its dimensions, particularly the nuclear threat, and yet missing from any even general orders was the Secretary of Defense. That is, get ready in case we're not able to do a negotiation, and nothing to the intelligence community that, tell me what you need, the resources to follow this like a hawk. And the last thing I want is not to have strategic warning that the Iranians are moving to any kind of breakout or sneak out to the bomb, which is a real genuine threat that we're under now, given how close they are. And on the question of negotiations, we'll see where this goes. Elliott and I both have well, Elliott does. I don't have the experience. I have the nightmare of having watched it. But Trump and Kim Jong-un, that's the worst case, right? Where he comes out hot and heavy against, he gets engaged and snared in a negotiation, he gets sweet talked to, and it's dragged out for the rest of his presidency, and we make absolutely zero progress on dismantling or neutralizing the North Korean nuclear program. And in the meantime, they're perfecting their missiles, continuing to work on miniaturization of a warhead to strike the United States and whatnot. That's the nightmare. I'm sure Trump believes Biden could get trapped by a negotiation. I cannot get trapped. I am too good a negotiator. I wrote, or at least somebody ghost wrote for me, The Art of the Deal. I know how to manage this and to use my leverage over Iran. And, God willing, I hope that's the case. I would only say 20 or 25 years in negotiations with the Iranians on the nuclear program have led nowhere, except in Iran right on the cusp of having nuclear weapons. And now we are in a situation where we have, this October deadline. We've got a Russian in charge of the Security Council in October, so you got to do it before that. I would say you got to negotiate this thing by the beginning of the summer, because simply getting a deal with the Iranians is not enough. I want 3 or 4 months of actual implementation and execution of a deal to show that they're in full compliance with what they're doing. So I think, you have a few months to negotiate the dismantling of their deal. I think you're going to need to demand upfront some real good faith efforts to show this is worth our time. They've got to blend down their 60% and 20% enriched uranium exported out of the country, dismantle the advanced centrifuge cascades that they have at places like Fordow and put those under IAEA lock and key, bring back all of the full complement of IAEA inspectors that they've been blocking, and all the cameras and monitoring equipment that they haven't allowed to be put back in place by the IAEA. So I think we need a lot. I think it's very unrealistic, but I think you're talking more almost about an ultimatum for immediate action and a very short deadline to negotiate something before we have to move to other options. So I would just say,
we had a report, I should say, that we put out that our Iran task force that you and Elliott are part of, that laid out some of those sort of preconditions and what negotiations, what should be the demands. Elliott, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think one other thing to add is this will cause a debate in the Trump administration. And I think, on one side, you'll have people saying, you don't want wars. You're going to get another Middle East war. This will be the end of your presidency. You're going to get sucked in. On the other side, you'll have the people saying, no, the model is Soleimani. This is a day or two. You say, we're doing this. Maybe you announce it when it's over. You're not sending any troops. This is not a major Middle Eastern war. I think that debate, that clash will take place in, whenever that is, the president needs to make a decision.
Yeah.
And we can point.
I think that after the lessons of the last attack of Israel on Iran, I think that it is easier to the second group, which says it's Soleimani kind of an attack. For America, I think it's 48 hours of Air Force, pure Air Force operation without boots on the ground, and I don't see the Iranians ready to go to full war. If it will be clear that what America is doing is destroying the nuclear facility, the Iranians will not take the risk of giving America a reason to destroy the whole facilities of which are needed for the future economy of Iran, because that is very easy to do. And I think that will be clear for the Iranians. Yes, the America is focusing on nuclear. They will not broaden the war. It is against their own interest. And probably it will be like kind of Soleimani operation, not so short, but in the idea, the philosophy behind it is the same. We are focusing on nuclear. Iranians understand it. Iranians don't have any interest to broaden it to areas in which they can lose everything.
By the way, I'll just add, and John and I wrote about this. You mentioned Soleimani, of course, just to remind everyone, that took place in January of 2020. That was 3 years into President Trump's term. And John and I wrote some last month that what Trump should do is do a reverse Biden, because a reverse Afghanistan, which is what Biden did with the withdrawal of Afghanistan, which was like 8 months or 7 or 8 months into his presidency in August of 21. And that debacle pretty much was the beginning of the end for him. His poll numbers started going down. They never recovered. It hurt him on the world stage. A lot of people argue that it led to Ukraine and so on. But if Trump shows something strong at the beginning, it will have positive repercussions for also his other dealings with China and so on. So
right, provided it succeeds. The one thing I would say about negotiations, Mike, is that maybe it plays into the debate that Elliott talks about, and to the extent that Trump makes an effort to do this, as long as he's disciplined about timelines and the demands he's making, maybe that question of legitimacy, both within the administration, the Congress, the American people, and to the extent he cares at all about the international community not coming down too hard against it, that he's given this a try. He's given negotiations an effort. And now his bottom line is there cannot be an Iranian nuclear weapon. They haven't agreed to dismantle it by themselves. We're going to have to do it for them by other means.
And I know we have 6 minutes left. I do want to get the normalization on this because President Trump made it clear in his inaugural he wants to be a peacemaker. I can't remember what he said in the press conference of the other day, but it's clear he wants to do this. Prime Minister Netanyahu made a reference to it. I think it was on Fox News. I watched. He also talked about it. I think it was on the Hannity show. He thinks there will be normalization. Each party wants it, which is true. I guess I'll turn to you, Elliott, first. I guess again, I want to get back to the sequencing. Do you deal with Iran first? Where does Gaza fit in? Where does normalization? If you accept what I said, the top three things: the normalization, Gaza, and Iran nuclear. Where does normalization fit in time-wise in this?
I think you do them all at once. You can't postpone any of these. Israel is at war in Gaza. Iran is moving toward a nuclear weapon. So you have to do this at the same time. I think we don't fully know on these three things who are the administration's people. I mean, is this all Steve Witkoff? Maybe. Is there going to be a special representative to negotiate with Iran or not? So the personnel thing will tell you something. But I think the question, in part, for Saudi Arabia, I mean, obviously, what do they want on the Palestinian issue? What can they accept? What can Israel offer? But there's the American part of this as well. How much can Trump produce in a defense deal with Saudi Arabia? A treaty, naming them a major non-NATO ally, 1 or 2 or 3 defense agreements that give them access to certain weapon systems. What can he get through Congress? Can he get 67 votes? Can he get 51 votes? And that's the real come on for the Saudis. That's what they want. And somebody's got to be able to figure out now with this Congress, what can we get?
Yeah, it's a good point. General Amidror, do you want to add to that? It's about sequencing, and then we'll conclude with John.
Of course, if everything can be done at the same time, it's fantastic. I don't see it happening at the same time. And I think that here it will be an issue of what can be done and what is less is less disturbing in the future. If that would be in my hand, I'll begin with the releasing of the hostages. From that moment, the flexibility of Israel in Gaza is in much better situation. Then I think, because of the dangerous situation with Iran and the very short time that we have till the snapback, I would go on Iran, giving it 3 months to negotiate, telling the Iranians, if after 3 months it doesn't work, you will have to face another situation, to limit the time, to put it on kind of a ticking clock, to give the Iranian the understanding that immediately after that, everything is open. America with Israel, Israel without America will be ready to do what is needed. And then it will be an open question, depends very much on the success, the level of success in Iran. The more success that will be achieved, the easier will be the negotiation with the Saudis. And when Iran without nuclear military facilities is a different Middle East, totally different Middle East. And we didn't mention even once Syria and what might happen between Turkey, Syria, and Israel in the future. The fact that the bridge from Tehran to the Mediterranean is broken is a fantastic situation when you speak about the constraints of Iran and Hezbollah. But it leads to another question relating to the relations between Turkey, the new regime in Damascus, and Israel. And by the way, there is something which is out of the equation, and it might be very influential in the future. Everyone in the Middle East, including inside Iran, understand that Iran didn't deliver. They didn't help Hezbollah. They didn't help Assad. And at the end of the day, the whole idea of the Ring of Fire was broken by force by Israel without Americans. And Iran today is not Iran in which you say, oh, if we're attacking Iran, we have to deal with Hezbollah, we have to deal with Hamas. No, it's Iran. Yeah. It's a different Iran. It's much easier. And this is an historical time. And this is the time to do it before they will recover, before they will find other ways to deal with the situation. So I think that the first issue should be release of the hostages to give Israel the whole spectrum of flexibility in Gaza. I don't know when it will be used, but that is the situation when the last hostages will be released. Then to deal with Iran with very limited time, ticking clock on the table, and then to decide. You don't have to make decisions now.
Yeah. By the way, and I know this would be for another discussion, but I think we would look at a military strike as not the last strike that might have to take place, but there might have to be others if the Iranians rebuild. John, I'm giving you, we've run out of time, but I'll give you the last minute or two on this.
Yeah, I do think it's important what General Amidror said, which I'm not sure was a topic of discussion this past week, which is, the Lebanon ceasefire and how do we proceed, but more important, Syria and the issue of the U.S. presence in Syria, because there's already a lot of news that the president has made a decision to pull out of eastern Syria, which will create its own new dynamic and in the region, both perhaps good and bad from my perspective. On the sequencing here, I agree with Amidror. I think that, if you want to get to normalization, I don't think, you can do it without a degree of calm in Gaza. If Israel has to go back in, if the hostages don't come back, if Israel has to go back in and spend another year of fairly high intensity, constant operations in Gaza, finishing off all the Hamas fighters and then figuring out, what are we going to do? I think it makes anything on normalization very difficult. Obviously, if the Trump is serious about it, ends up being serious and literal about his plan for moving 2 million Palestinians out of Gaza, I think that as well will just create a degree of friction and tension in the system that's not going to allow the Saudis to move forward, and will give the Iranians, you know, a narrative that they'll be able to beat the Arabs with and beat America and Israel with. So I think you got to have a degree of calm in Gaza. And then it's a question of, you know, how quickly you can move together on the normalization front. If you can come up with a formula on the Palestinians, I do have, you know, an idea about how you might do that. And a lot of it has to do with the Trump peace plan of 2020 and bringing that back. I think it has something for everybody in it to a degree. But I do think, you know, the Iran thing is going to have to be done quite soon. And from my perspective and Israel's perspective, if you can successfully do the Iran thing, then you go to Saudi Arabia and you can talk about, okay, what's the price of normalization, Your Royal Highness? You think we're really going to pay this very high coin for getting you to do Israel after we've destroyed the Iranian nuclear program? I think we'll be in a better position to maybe negotiate a better deal and negotiate them down a bit. But you know, it all depends.
Okay. Look, thank you, John and Elliott and General Amidror. Appreciate all your time. We appreciate everybody that turned out today to listen to this discussion. And it's certainly not been a boring week here in Washington. And there's a lot of more interesting things ahead. Please keep turning to JINSA for these webinars and all our the writing, the papers, the reports, and so on. That we've been putting out on all these events. Thank you very much for joining us. I wish
Thank you.
everybody a good evening. Thanks again, guys, for being
Thank
with
you.
us. Thanks a lot. Bye.